No one heard Brennan Hale return to Cedar Ridge, not the mailman who still delivered letters addressed to occupant, not the kids who used his driveway to turn their bikes around, not even the woman across the fence who'd kept his roses alive for 4 years while he rotted in places that didn't exist on any map. He stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of the house he used to own, duffel bag heavy against his shoulder, and realized something had shifted in his spine. Not just the shrapnel still lodged near his L4 vertebra, something deeper, the kind of damage you can't see on an X-ray. The mountains behind Cedar Ridge looked the same. Pine trees, snow on the peaks, air so cold it burned going down. Everything else felt wrong. Brennan's left hand trembled as he reached for the gate latch. He pulled it back, shoved it into his pocket. 4 years ago, his hands signed contracts worth 9 figures. Now they couldn't stay still long enough to open a fence. The house looked smaller than he remembered. White paint peeling near the gutters, front porch sagging on one side. Someone had replaced the mailbox. The old one had his name on it in brass letters. This one just said the address. He wondered if that meant something. If you've ever had to start over in the one place that knew you before you broke, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Brennan climbed the porch steps slowly, his right knee locked on the second step. He gripped the railing, waited for the joint to remember how to bend, then kept moving. The key still worked. The door opened with the same creak it always had. Inside smelled like dust and something floral, lavender maybe. He didn't remember planting lavender. The living room furniture sat exactly where he'd left it. Couch facing the window, coffee table with a water ring he'd never gotten around to fixing. The remote control still on the armrest where he'd set it the morning he got the call that changed everything. Brennan dropped the duffel bag. It hit the floor with a sound that seemed too loud for an empty house. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. Cedar Ridge hadn't changed. White fences, trimmed lawns, American flags on porches. A kid rode past on a bike, earbuds in, head bobbing to music Brennan couldn't hear. Normal. Safe. Everything he'd fought for. Everything that felt like a lie now. Movement caught his eye. Across the fence, in the yard next door, a woman stood with a garden hose in her hand. Blonde hair pulled over one shoulder. Summer dress that didn't match the cold air. She was watering flowers that shouldn't have been blooming in October. She looked up. Their eyes met. Brennan recognized her. Maribel something. Crow, maybe. She lived next door before he left. Waved sometimes. Smiled when he brought the trash cans in. Normal neighbor stuff. She stared at him like she'd seen a ghost. The hose slipped in her hand. Water sprayed across the fence, splashing onto the sidewalk, soaking the hem of her dress. She didn't seem to notice. Brennan raised his hand in a half wave. Maribel didn't wave back. She just stood there, water pooling around her feet, mouth slightly open. Then she turned off the hose, dropped it in the grass, and walked toward the fence. Not fast, not slow. Deliberate. Like she'd been waiting for this moment and now didn't know what to do with it. Brennan stepped away from the window. His chest tightened, the same tightness he felt in the cell when the lights went out and the questions started, when silence became a weapon and time stopped meaning anything. He forced himself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Count to 4 again. The knock on the door came 30 seconds later. Soft, almost apologetic. Brennan's jaw clenched. He didn't want to talk. Didn't want to explain where he'd been, or why he looked different, or why his hands still shook when he thought too hard about locked doors and concrete walls. But Cedar Ridge was a small town, and small towns didn't let you hide. He walked to the door and opened it. Maribel stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes red like she'd been crying or was about to. "You're back," she said. Brennan nodded. "I thought—" She stopped, looked down at her hands. "Everyone thought you were dead. I wasn't. I know, obviously. She laughed, but it came out wrong, strained. It's just 4 years, Brennan. No calls, no letters, nothing. I couldn't. Couldn't or wouldn't? Brennan didn't answer. Maribel studied him for a long moment. Her gaze moved from his face to his hands to the way he stood with his weight shifted to one side, favoring the knee that didn't bend right anymore. You look different, she said quietly. Yeah. Thinner. Older. Yeah. She bit her lip. Are you okay? Brennan wanted to laugh, wanted to tell her that okay was a word people used when they didn't understand what the opposite of okay actually looked like. But he didn't. I'm here, he said instead. Maribel nodded like that made sense. Then she glanced over her shoulder, back toward her house, and her expression changed, tightened, like she just remembered something important. You should know, she said, voice dropping lower. Things changed while you were gone. Brennan frowned. What things? The neighborhood, people, some folks... She hesitated. Some folks weren't happy when they found out you were coming back. Why? Maribel opened her mouth to answer. Then a voice cut through the air. Well, well. Brennan turned. Across the street, standing in the middle of his perfectly manicured lawn, stood a man Brennan didn't recognize. Tall, clean-cut, polo shirt tucked into khaki pants, arms crossed, smile that didn't reach his eyes. The prodigal soldier returns, the man said. Maribel's face went pale. Brennan's stomach dropped. Because something in the man's tone, the way he said soldier like it was an insult, told Brennan everything he needed to know. The war hadn't ended when he left the battlefield. It had followed him home. What did this man do while Brennan was gone that makes even his neighbor afraid to speak? Drop your city in the comment if you think you know what's coming. Brennan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like voices. He knew it wasn't real, but his body didn't. At 0200 hours, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Brennan stared at the screen for 10 seconds before answering. Yeah? Mr. Hale. The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, the kind of voice that sold things people didn't need. This is Darren Moss. I represent the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Welcome home. Brennan said nothing. I'm calling to inform you that there's a community meeting tomorrow night, 7 p.m. We'd love to see you there. I'm not interested. It's mandatory for all homeowners, Mr. Hale, especially those who've been absent. The way he said absent made Brennan's jaw tighten. I'll think about it. We hope you will. Cedar Ridge has standards. We've worked hard to maintain them while you were away. The line went dead. Brennan set the phone down and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. 4 years ago, Brennan Hale was the kind of man people didn't call unless they needed something impossible done quietly. His logistics company moved fuel, medical supplies, and equipment through war zones faster than governments could. He didn't advertise, didn't do interviews, didn't need to. His reputation was enough. Senators knew his name, generals had his number, and when the war escalated and the U.S. needed boots on the ground, Brennan didn't just write checks, he enlisted. Not because he believed in the mission, because he believed in the men. The decision cost him everything. Kandahar was supposed to be routine, supply convoy, in and out. But intelligence missed the ambush, missed the IEDs buried in the road, missed the fact that someone had sold them out. The explosion took half his unit. The rest came later. Brennan remembered waking up in a field hospital with ringing in his ears and blood on his hands that wasn't his. He remembered a doctor telling him his spine was fractured, that he'd never walk the same, that he was lucky to be alive. He didn't feel lucky. 3 weeks later, they moved him to a black site in Eastern Europe. No charges, no trial, no lawyers. just questions and silence. The kind of silence that makes you forget your own name. Brennan learned fast that money didn't matter in a place where no one knew who you were. Power didn't matter. Reputation didn't matter. All that mattered was how long you could hold on before you broke. He held on for 4 years. Now, he was home. And home didn't want him. The next morning, Brennan walked to the mailbox. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Like everyone was watching from behind their curtains but pretending not to. He opened the mailbox and pulled out a stack of letters, bills, flyers, a handwritten note on expensive cardstock. The note read, "We've maintained your property in your absence. Landscaping fees total $8,400. Payment due within 30 days. Cedar Ridge HOA." Brennan stared at the number. $8,000. For grass. He crumpled the note and shoved it in his pocket. Across the street, the man from yesterday, the one with the polo shirt and the smile, stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching. His name was Calder Rusk. Brennan had done his research. Calder moved to Cedar Ridge 2 years ago, took over the HOA, ran it like a dictatorship. Fines for everything, complaints about everything, made life hell for anyone who didn't fall in line. And while Brennan was gone, Calder had tried to buy his house. Maribel told him last night. Told him Calder showed up the day after the news reported Brennan missing, presumed dead. Offered her cash. Said the neighborhood needed stronger leadership. Said men like Brennan were relics. She told him no. Calder didn't like hearing no. Brennan walked back to the house. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Hale, this is Sharon Wiley from Channel 9 News. We'd love to do a story on your return. Local hero comes home. It's compelling." Brennan hung up. 10 minutes later, another call. Then another. By noon, he'd stopped answering. At 1900 hours, Brennan stood outside the community center. The meeting had already started. Through the window, he could see the room packed with neighbors. Calder stood at the front, pointing at a PowerPoint slide, talking fast. Brennan pushed the door open. Every head turned. The room went silent. Calder stopped mid-sentence. Then he smiled. "Ah, Mr. Hale, so glad you could join us." Brennan didn't move from the doorway. "Please," Calder said, gesturing to an empty chair in the back. "Sit. We're just discussing neighborhood improvements." Brennan walked to the chair and sat. His knee protested. He ignored it. Calder continued his presentation. Something about property values, shared expenses, the importance of community standards. Brennan barely listened. He was too busy watching the faces around him. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked angry. A few looked scared. And in the front row, a woman Brennan didn't recognize leaned over and whispered something to Calder. Calder nodded. Then he turned to Brennan. "Actually," Calder said, "since you're here, there's something we need to address." Brennan's pulse quickened. "We've received complaints," Calder continued, "about your property. About activity." "What activity?" "Visitors, late at night, vehicles parked on the street. It's disruptive." Brennan's jaw tightened. The visitors were veterans, men from his unit, men who had nowhere else to go. "They're friends," Brennan said. "They're a liability," Calder shot back. "This is a family neighborhood, Mr. Hale. We have standards." The room murmured in agreement. Brennan stood. "I fought for this country," he said quietly. "So did they." Calder's smile widened. "And we appreciate that, truly. But patriotism doesn't exempt you from the rules." Brennan felt the walls closing in. Not the walls of the community center, the walls of the cell, the black site, the place where rules didn't exist, and neither did he. He turned and walked out. Behind him, Calder's voice echoed. "7-day notice, Mr. Hale. Clean it up, or we'll handle it for you." Brennan didn't look back. He stepped into the cold night air and realized something he should have known all along. The enemy wasn't overseas. The enemy was right here, wearing a polo shirt and drinking overpriced coffee. Brennan didn't go home. He walked. Past the community center, past the white fences and perfect lawns, past the streetlights that made everything look clean and safe. His phone buzzed at his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from a number he recognized. "You good, bro? Heard about the meeting." Marcus. Marcus Webb, staff sergeant, lost his arm in Kandahar. Came home to a wife who'd already moved on and a VA system that didn't care. Brennan had been letting him crash on the couch for 2 weeks. He typed back, "Yeah, just walking." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "Don't do anything stupid." Brennan almost laughed. Too late. He shoved the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. The thing about black sites is they don't break you all at once. They do it slowly. Strip away your name first, then your rank, then your rights. Then they start with the questions. Where were you on the night of the ambush? Who gave you the coordinates? Who paid you? Brennan told them the truth 100 times. No one believed him. Because the truth didn't fit the narrative. The narrative was simple. Someone sold out the convoy, someone with access, someone with money. And Brennan Hale was a billionaire who'd enlisted under suspicious circumstances. So they locked him up. No trial, no lawyer, no phone call. Just a concrete room and a man in a suit who asked the same questions every day for 18 months. Brennan learned fast that the mind breaks before the body, that silence is louder than screaming, that the worst torture isn't pain, it's uncertainty. Not knowing if today is the day they let you go, or the day they decide you're not worth keeping alive. Brennan survived by doing one thing: forgetting who he used to be. The billionaire died in that cell. The man who walked out was someone else. Someone smaller, quieter, harder. Someone who didn't trust easy answers or clean explanations. Someone who knew that power wasn't about money, it was about control. And control could be taken from you in a heartbeat. Brennan stopped walking. He was standing in front of Calder Rusk's house. The lights were on inside. Through the window, he could see Calder sitting at a dining table laughing. A woman sat across from him. 2 kids ran circles around the room. Normal. Happy. Untouched. Brennan's fists clenched. He didn't want to hurt Calder. He wanted to erase him. But he knew better. Violence wasn't the answer. Not here, not now. So he turned around and walked home. When he got back, Marcus was sitting on the porch smoking a cigarette. "You good?" Marcus asked. "Yeah." Marcus didn't believe him. Brennan could tell by the way he looked at him, the same way the doctors looked at him in the field hospital, like he was broken and pretending not to be. "Calder's a punk," Marcus said. "All bark." "Maybe." "Nah, for real. Dudes like that fold when you push back." Brennan sat down next to him. What if pushing back makes it worse? Marcus flicked the cigarette into the yard. "Then you push harder." Brennan didn't respond. They sat in silence for a while, watching the street. Then Marcus said, "You ever think about what you'd do if you saw the guy who set us up?" Brennan's chest tightened. "Every day." "And?" "I don't know." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, me neither." That night, Brennan had the dream again, the same one he'd been having since the explosion. He was back in the convoy, heat shimmering off the road, dust in his mouth, radio crackling with static. Then the flash, the world flipping sideways, metal screaming. Bodies burning, and through the smoke, a figure standing on the ridge, watching, always watching. Brennan couldn't see the face, but he knew. Someone had been there. Someone had let it happen. He woke up at 0400, drenched in sweat, The house was silent. Marcus was asleep on the couch. Brennan walked to the bathroom and splashed water on his face. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Thinner, older, eyes that didn't blink enough. He wondered if Maribel had noticed, if she saw what he saw, a ghost pretending to be alive. 3 days later, the notice came, taped to his front door in a plastic sleeve. Cedar Ridge HOA, violation notice. Brennan ripped it down and read it. Failure to maintain property standards, unauthorized occupants, disturbing the peace. Fine, $5,000, due in 7 days, or the HOA would take appropriate action. Brennan crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He hadn't touched it in 4 years. The password still worked. Inside, his empire was still running, automated, efficient, profitable. Contracts with governments, supply chains that moved billions of dollars a year, all of it invisible, all of it his. Brennan stared at the screen. He'd built this company from nothing, sacrificed everything for it, and it had kept running without him, like he didn't matter, like he'd never mattered. He closed the laptop. Then he opened it again and started typing. By dawn, he had a plan. Not revenge, something better. Because Calder Rusk thought power came from rules and fines and fear, but Brennan knew the truth. Real power came from knowing what people wanted and taking it away before they realized it was gone. Brennan just went from victim to strategist, but what's the plan? Drop your thoughts in the comment if you think Calder's about to regret everything. Calder Rusk didn't like surprises. He liked order, control, a neighborhood where every lawn was the same height and every mailbox the same color. Cedar Ridge was his kingdom, and he'd spent 2 years making sure everyone knew it. The HOA meetings, the fines, the complaints. It wasn't about the money. It was about reminding people who was in charge. Calder grew up poor, Section 8 housing, food stamps, a father who drank, and a mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent. He swore he'd never live like that again, and he didn't. He went to college on loans he was still paying off, got a job in finance, married a woman whose family had money, moved to Cedar Ridge because it was the kind of place people like him weren't supposed to belong. And then he made himself indispensable. Took over the HOA, rewrote the bylaws, turned the neighborhood into a machine that ran on compliance. People hated him, but they respected him. Or at least they were too scared to challenge him. Until Brennan Hale came back. Calder stood in his kitchen, staring at his laptop screen. A property search, public records, financial filings. Brennan Hale wasn't just some washed-up vet. He was a billionaire. Or used to be. The company was still active, still profitable, but Brennan's name wasn't on anything anymore. Calder frowned. Something didn't add up. A man with that much money doesn't just disappear for 4 years. Unless he's hiding. Or running. Calder's phone buzzed. A text from his wife. "Don't forget to pick up Emma from soccer." He typed back, "I won't." Then he opened another tab and searched Brennan Hale, Kandahar. The first result was a news article from 3 years ago. Billionaire logistics CEO missing after Afghanistan ambush. Calder clicked it. The article was short, vague, said Brennan had been embedded with a military unit conducting supply operations. The convoy was ambushed. Casualties were high. Brennan's status was unknown. Presumed dead, but not confirmed. Calder leaned back in his chair. Presumed dead. That meant no body, no proof. And in Calder's experience, people who came back from the dead usually had something to hide. He closed the laptop and walked to the window. Across the street, Brennan's house looked exactly the same, except for the car parked in the driveway. A beat-up sedan with a veteran sticker on the bumper. Calder's jaw tightened. He'd told Brennan to handle the visitors. Clearly, he hadn't. Calder pulled out his phone and dialed. "Darren, it's Calder. I need you to draft another notice. Brennan Hale, parking violation, and see if we can escalate the occupancy issue." "You sure?" Darren's voice sounded hesitant. "Guy just got back. Might be bad optics." "I don't care about optics. I care about standards." "All right, I'll send it over." Calder hung up. He walked outside, coffee mug in hand, and stood on his porch. The street was quiet. Perfect. Except for the house across the way. Calder sipped his coffee and watched, waiting. Brennan knew Calder was watching. He could feel it. The same way he felt the guards watching him in the cell. The same way he felt the interrogator watching him through the one-way glass. Always watching. Always waiting for him to slip. Brennan sat on the couch, laptop open, scrolling through files. Property records, tax documents, HOA bylaws. He wasn't looking for a loophole. He was looking for a pattern, and he found it. Calder Rusk had been filing complaints for 2 years, not just against Brennan, against everyone. Elderly couples who couldn't afford to repaint their houses, single parents who worked nights and didn't mow their lawns on schedule. Veterans who parked RVs in their driveways. Calder targeted the weak, the ones who couldn't fight back. And when they couldn't pay the fines, Calder pushed them out. Foreclosures, forced sales, quiet evictions. All legal, all clean, all cruel. Brennan's jaw tightened. He clicked another file, a purchase agreement. Calder had bought 3 properties in the last year, all of them from people he'd fined into bankruptcy, all of them at prices well below market value. Brennan leaned back. Calder wasn't just enforcing rules, he was profiting from them. Marcus walked into the room, rubbing his eyes. "You sleep at all?" Marcus asked. "No." "Man, you gotta rest. You look like death." Brennan didn't respond. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down. "What you working on?" "Research." "On what?" "The guy across the street." Marcus glanced out the window. "Calder? Yeah, he's a piece of work. What you find?" Brennan turned the laptop around. Marcus read the screen. His expression darkened. "He's buying people out?" "Yeah." "That's messed up." "It's legal." "Legal don't make it right." Brennan closed the laptop. "No, it doesn't." Marcus studied him. "You gonna do something about it?" Brennan didn't answer, because he didn't know yet. That afternoon, Brennan walked to the mailbox. Another notice. This one was different. Mandatory property inspection, 48 hours notice. Brennan's chest tightened. They were coming inside his house, looking for violations, looking for reasons to fine him, to push him out. He crumpled the notice and shoved it in his pocket. Then he saw Maribel. She was standing by her fence, watering the flowers again, but this time she wasn't smiling. "You got one too?" she asked. Brennan nodded. Maribel sighed. "He's been doing this to everyone. Inspections, violations. It's his way of keeping control." "How long's this been going on?" "Since he took over the HOA. 2 years, maybe." Brennan frowned. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Maribel looked away. "Because people are scared and tired and broke." Brennan's fists clenched. "What about you?" Maribel hesitated. "I got lucky. My place passed inspection." "Barely?" She didn't answer. Brennan walked closer to the fence. "Maribel, what did Calder want when he tried to buy my house?" She bit her lip. "He said the neighborhood needed better leadership, that you were a liability, that if you ever came back, you'd bring trouble." "And what did you say?" Maribel met his eyes. "I told him to go to hell." Brennan almost smiled. Almost. "Thank you." Maribel shrugged. "You're my neighbor. That's what neighbors do." Brennan nodded. Then he turned and walked back to his house. Inside, Marcus was watching TV. Brennan sat down next to him. "I need to make a call," Brennan said. "To who?" "Someone who owes me a favor." Marcus raised an eyebrow. This gonna be messy? Brennan stared at the wall. No, it's gonna be quiet. Because Calder Rusk thought he was untouchable, that rules and fines and fear were enough. But Brennan knew something Calder didn't. The quietest moves are the deadliest. The inspection happened on a Tuesday. 2 men in polo shirts, clipboards, eyes that moved too fast, looking for problems to write down. Calder stood on the sidewalk outside, arms crossed, watching the whole thing like a man watching a building he already owned burn slowly to the ground. Brennan opened the door before they knocked. He stepped aside, said nothing. They walked through every room, measured window clearances, checked outlets, jotted numbers on their sheets like accountants who enjoyed bad news. Marcus sat on the couch with his one good arm resting on his knee, watching them move through Brennan's house like they belonged there. One inspector stopped in front of him. "Is this individual a registered occupant?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "He's a guest." Guests are limited to 14 consecutive days. HOA Regulations, Section 9. "He's been here 2 weeks. Then he needs to vacate." Marcus stood. Brennan put a hand on his shoulder. "It's handled," Brennan said quietly. Something in his voice closed the conversation. Marcus sat back down. The inspector moved on. They left 20 minutes later. Calder waved from the sidewalk. Brennan closed the door. Marcus stood immediately. "Bro, you're just gonna let them walk through your house like that?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because they're looking for fire, and I'm not giving them smoke." Marcus paced the floor. "You got every right to have people here. This is your house." "It is, but right now they're holding the rule book, and I'm not, so I wait." "Wait for what?" Brennan sat down and opened his laptop. He turned it toward Marcus. On the screen, a single email. 3 paragraphs. From Angela Torres, the compliance attorney he'd called 4 days ago. Marcus read it. His eyes went wide. "Forensic audit?" "Already started." "HOA funds?" "Contracts awarded to shell companies. Community improvement money that never went to the community. Foreclosures filed without proper notice." Marcus sat down slowly. This dude's been stealing from the neighborhood? Legally, most of it, but legal isn't the same as clean. Is it enough to bury him? Brennan closed the laptop. Give it 72 hours. That night, the police showed up, lights flashing, 2200 hours. Knock on the door hard enough to wake the whole street. Brennan opened it. 2 officers, young, a little uncomfortable. "Evening, sir." Noise complaint. Brennan looked past them at the street. Quiet, no wind, not even a dog barking. "There's no noise," Brennan said. Caller said disturbance, possible shouting. Brennan's chest didn't move. His voice didn't change. "There's nothing here. Come in if you want to look." They did. They found Marcus asleep on the couch with the TV on mute. They found an empty kitchen, a clean living room, a man who'd survived 4 years in a place that didn't exist on any map, standing quietly in the hallway with his hands at his sides. The officers left without writing anything down. Brennan walked to the window. Across the street, Calder's living room light was still on. The next morning, Maribel came over. She knocked softly, the kind of knock that carries weight. Brennan opened the door and she stepped inside without being asked. She sat on the couch with her hands folded in her lap like she'd been rehearsing what to say. Brennan sat across from her. "You okay?" She shook her head. "No." She looked up. "I need to tell you something I should have said the day you came back." Brennan waited. "The night you got blown up," her voice caught. "The night the news said presumed dead. Calder came to my door." Silence pressed down on the room. He was dressed up, like he'd been expecting good news. He said Cedar Ridge needed stronger men, that people like you were a liability. She looked down. "Then he asked me to sign over your property to the HOA trust, said he had a buyer ready, said it was what was best for the neighborhood." Brennan didn't move. I told him no. Maribel's jaw tightened. I told him that if you ever came back, you deserved to come home. Her eyes filled. He's been making my life miserable ever since. Inspections, fines, letters. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, Brennan. I should have told you the day you walked up that driveway. Brennan looked at her for a long moment. You don't have anything to be sorry about. You kept my house. You kept my roses. You told him no when it would have been easier to say yes. He leaned forward. That's the only reason I have a home to come back to. Maribel exhaled. Something in her shoulders released, like she'd been carrying that weight since the day he left. Brennan stood and walked to the window. Calder was on his porch, coffee mug, perfect lawn, perfect posture. Man who believed he'd already won. Brennan's phone buzzed. Angela Torres. He answered. I have what you need. Angela said. All of it? All of it. Subpoenas are filed. The city council contact cooperated once he understood what was coming. Federal housing violation tied to the unauthorized foreclosures. That alone triggers an investigation. Brennan exhaled slowly. What's the timeline? Board meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m. Calder will be there expecting routine approval on 3 new property contracts. And instead? Instead, the audit results drop in front of the entire board, the attending homeowners, and a federal housing compliance officer who'll be sitting in the 3rd row. Brennan looked at Calder one more time. I'll be there. Thursday came cold and still. The community center filled faster than it ever had. Word had spread, not loudly, quietly, the way truth moves through small towns, whispered between neighbors over back fences and across driveways. The elderly couple who'd lost their home, the single mother who'd paid a fine she couldn't afford, the veteran down the block who'd been pushed out 6 months before Brennan returned. They all came. Calder stood at the front of the room in his best shirt, confident, smiling. He opened the meeting like a man who owned the room because he always had. He didn't notice Angela Torres in the 3rd row until she stood up. Mr. Rusk, she said, before you proceed with the new contracts, I'd like to present findings from a forensic audit of Cedar Ridge HOA financials for the last 2 years. Calder froze. Who authorized? Brennan Hale. As a property owner in good standing, he had legal right to request an independent audit under Illinois HOA Statute 14.2. Calder's face went white. Angela opened her folder. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Number by number, document by document, contract by contract, she laid out every dollar that had been collected and never spent, every fine that went into a trust no homeowner could access, every property sold below value to a company Calder controlled through a cousin's LLC. The room got very quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's the moment before a verdict. When Angela finished, she set the folder down. A federal housing compliance officer is present tonight to formally receive this documentation. Mr. Rusk will be notified of next steps. Calder looked at the room, at his neighbors, at the people he'd fined and bullied and slowly pushed into corners for 2 years. He looked at Brennan, who was standing in the back row. Brennan hadn't spoken a single word all night. Calder opened his mouth, closed it. The board chair leaned forward. Calder, you're suspended pending investigation. Please surrender the HOA keys and leave the premises. 2 people started clapping, then more, then the whole room. Calder walked out without a word. He didn't look back. No one stopped him, and no one followed him. Weeks later, Cedar Ridge held a block party. It started as a small thing, a few tables, a grill, someone's playlist coming out of a Bluetooth speaker. By noon, the whole street was out. The elderly couple who'd nearly lost their house stood by the fence with glasses of lemonade, laughing at something the veteran down the block had said. The single mother had brought her kids, and they were chasing each other through the sprinklers. Marcus stood near the grill, working it one-handed the way only someone who refused to be defined by what they'd lost could. Brennan stood at the edge of the lawn. Someone pressed a cold beer into his hand. He didn't catch who. He stood there, looking at the street. The white fences, the American flags, the neighbors who'd stopped being strangers the moment they had something worth fighting for together. Maribel appeared beside him. She didn't say anything at first, just stood close, watching the same street. Then she said, "You didn't have to fight again." Brennan took a sip of the beer. "I know. So, why did you?" He looked at the street for a long moment, at Marcus laughing, at children running in circles, at the flag on his own porch snapping softly in the afternoon wind. "Because the men I served with deserved to come home to something real." His voice was quiet. Not a neighborhood run like a prison, not a country that forgets what sacrifice looks like the minute it stops being useful. Maribel turned to look at him. "And you?" she asked softly. "What did you come home to?" Brennan looked back at her. For the first time since he'd returned, his hands were still. "Something worth protecting," he said. Maribel smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one, the kind that takes up the whole face. The afternoon stretched out golden over Cedar Ridge. The music drifted down the street. The smell of something on the grill pulled everyone a little closer together. And Brennan Hale, the man who'd survived Kandahar, black sites, and the particular cruelty of being erased by the country he'd served, stood in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. Alive. Present. Home. He'd come back with nothing but a duffel bag and a body that still didn't work right. He left that block party with something no amount of money had ever bought him. The knowledge that his name had been defended, that someone had stood at a fence and said no, that home wasn't the house, it was the people who kept the light on while you were gone. Some battles don't end on a battlefield. Some of them end on a Tuesday morning in a community center. Some of them end at a block party with a cold beer and someone standing close enough to remind you who you are. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do after surviving everything that tried to break them is simply this: stay. The most dangerous battles are never fought with weapons. They're fought by people who quietly decide that one sentence, one act of loyalty, one refusal to give up is enough to change everything. And it always is. If this story moved you, drop your location and tell me in the comments, who in your life kept the light on while you were gone? Because every Brennan needs a Maribel, and every Maribel deserves to be seen.